often have you felt restricted to spiritual practices that often seem outdated and of little relevance in today's world? Are you discouraged to express your own creative talents and develop spiritual practices that are uniquely you? The Liturgical Rebels podcast is for people like you who want to reimagine and reconstruct their faith and spiritual practices. It's for those who want to reshape belief and journey closer to God's wholeness with peace, justice, and flourishing, not just for themselves, but for the earth and all its inhabitants.
In today's episode of Liturgical Rebels, we continue our discussion of Celtic Christian spirituality. My name is Christine Syne, and today I will be in conversation with David Cassian Cole, the founder and executive director of Waymark Ministries, and an international spiritual teacher and retreat leader. He has lectured in a variety of Christian institutions and appeared in numerous television programs. He is the author of 8 books, including Celtic Advent and Celtic Lent. He was deputy guardian of the community of Aidan and Hilda, a Celtic-inspired new monastic order, for several years, and has also been a full-time church minister and teaching pastor at different churches. He is a certified Reiki practitioner with a master's degree in Christian spirituality, specializing in the Christian mystics. He wrote his thesis on how historic Celtic Christianity can inform new monastic ideas of discipleship. David, I am delighted to be able to interview you today. I've been wanting to kind of meet you for a long time because I've followed you on Facebook for many years and have used your books Celtic Advent and Celtic Lent at different times. And you have a rich and varied history of interest in Celtic spirituality, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing what you have to say about it. So welcome to Liturgical Rebels podcast.
Fantastic. Christine, it's wonderful to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Oh, you're welcome. Can you tell us a bit about your journey into these different streams of Christianity and why you, Celtic spirituality and monasticism, I know you've also been involved in, and why do these continue to hold your interest?
Well, my journey into them was accidental, if you believe in such things, which I actually don't. It began at the beginning, as all good stories do, where I was born into a family that went to a very fundamental evangelical church, to the point of them being concerned that I was going off the rails because I had joined the Baptist youth group when I was in my teens. So very, very fundamental, very strict, ex-brethren place. So I never really connected with anything spiritual there. I would say even there wasn't really anything spiritual there in the way that I would understand it now. There's a lot of teaching, there's a lot of kind of brain ways of learning the things, but it never really connected with me. So I spent a good chunk of my teenage years hanging out with witches and pagans, because I'd rebelled against the church. I was rebelling against my parents, and what better way to rebel against fundamental Christian parents than hang out with witches and pagans? So that's what I was doing, and I had some real spiritual experiences, and they're not massive, just bits and pieces. But I really found a resonance in the kind of the Druidic and the pre-Christian Celtic style spirituality that really resonated with me. And then I had a mystical experience whilst trying to do a kind of pagan ritual, where I had a mystical experience of what I would now understand as the cosmic Christ, which was the Christ that is greater than the kind of the historical Jesus that I had been brought up with, who was a very practical kind of figure that happened to also be God. and I was kind of 19, 20 at that time. So my spiritual journey, my Christocentric spiritual journey, started off quite differently to most people I have known, who kind of made an intelligent cognitive decision about which God they want to believe in. My journey started with this mystical experience of this enormous sense of reality that I encountered, the cosmic Christ. I spent my 20s into my early 30s being a youth worker, joining with churches and Christian youth work organizations, but I never really engaged with the teachings and theologies and understandings of the traditional church. I still don't really. But I joined in with what I was doing because they would pay my wages and it was exciting and it was good fun being a youth worker in my 20s. Now, I went into a Christian bookshop. I was working in North England at the time, in Yorkshire. And I went into a Christian bookshop to pick up some resources for a youth event I was doing. And just at the back of the bookshop, there was, just browsing at the books, like I always do, I'm a bit of a bookworm. There was this book called Exploring Celtic Spirituality. Well, it's kind of been hidden away. It was before the days where Christian bookshops had a whole Celtic section of music and jewellery and artwork and books and things. And I think it'd obviously come in a box of, stuff from the publishers, and they'd gone, oh, I don't know about this one. We'll just put it at the back here, tuck it behind a big fat book. But I found it and I thought, I wonder if that spirituality that resonated with me in my pagan days, I wonder if there's a Christian version of that. And so I was in my kind of mid-20s at that time, and it resonated with me. So it was written by someone who I'd never heard of at that time, a guy called Ray Simpson, who
yes.
Subsequently become a very good friend of mine. But yeah, it really resonated with me. So that was the start of my kind of Celtic journey. I just kind of carried on reading more books. I found Philip Newell, I found David Adam, and just kind of carried on with those kind of books and learning. And as far as I knew, the circles that I was moving in, I was the only person in the world who was trying to live this out in a modern context, because I didn't know anybody else. I was still in the fairly kind of conservative evangelical circuit. Some people even thinking that the whole thing was completely New Age and weird, and I shouldn't be doing it.
Yeah.
Celtic Christianity thing. And then one of the organizations that I worked for gave opportunity for their workers to go away on a retreat once a year, as well as having their annual leave. And you can either go to a conference or an organized retreat, or you can just go away somewhere on your own. And I thought, I'm going to take the opportunity to go somewhere that I can. I've been reading about these Celtic on the edge places, one of the British ones. So I thought I'm going to go to Iona. So I'd been in this Christian bookshop. I'd accidentally come across this Christian book on Celtic spirituality. I started emailing the Iona community to talk about going and staying with them for a week or so, 10 days. And somewhere along the lines, something happened. I still don't understand what it was, whether it was just some kind of divine intervention or whether it was physical, electronic, device intervention. I don't really understand technology. But somewhere along the line, my emails became diverted, and I thought I was talking to Iona, which is where the thread began. But actually, the last few emails, I'd been talking to the Anglican Diocesan Retreat Centre on Lindisfarne.
Interesting.
So, yeah, and I don't really know what happened. And I asked them, and they went, we don't really know what's happened. He said, but what I do know is that we've been sending big files backwards and forwards to Iona. So maybe one of your emails just kind of got caught up in the big files or something.
Interesting, yeah.
And so I went, I wanted to go to Iona. Do I want to go to Lindisfarne? So I thought, yeah, okay, we'll go to Lindisfarne. It's a day less travel each way as well from where I was at the time. I'll go to Lindisfarne. It's still one of those Celtic places. So I accidentally ended up on Lindisfarne in this Celtic journey I was on, still living this out by myself. And while I was there, I walked around the corner one evening, and there was another retreat centre that had a sign up saying we do night prayer at 9:00 every night. So I thought, brilliant. It was about 7:30 then. I thought I'd go and sit on a rock for an hour, do some meditation, come back, go to night prayer. It'd be a brilliant way of ending the day. So that's what I did, or at least that's what I thought I did. But I obviously was deeper in meditation than I realized. That when I came back to go to this night prayer, I was rattling on the door and it was locked. And I thought, it's a bit weird. But there was a group of people in the lounge of the retreat center that the night prayer was at, and they opened up the door and said, what would you like? I said, well, I've come for night prayer. And they said, you're a bit late. It's about 9:45 now. We've just finished. But come in for a cup of tea. We're all just sitting around chatting. So I came in for a cup of tea and sat with them for a minute, just enjoying their company. And then they started to introduce themselves as they went round. And opposite me was this old guy sat in a chair in the corner who was leading the retreat. And he said, my name is Ray Simpson, and I'm the guardian of the community that owns this retreat center. And then they kind of went on, and my brain, that couple of people further on, went, hang on a minute. Didn't he write that book that was kind of a paradigm shift moment in your spiritual journey? So I'd accidentally found the book. I'd accidentally ended up on Lindisfarne, accidentally bumped into Ray, and was talking about how I was trying to live this out by myself. And he basically said, you're living out our way of life, the community of Aidan and Hilda's way of life. Went off and got the handbook, showed me it all, and I thought, this is amazing. There's a community of people that already exist, that are living inspired by this Celtic Christian spirituality, that have a monastic rule or way of life they've already got set out, which is almost verbatim to how I'd kind of set it up without knowing they were there. This is obviously, the divine orchestration. So I said, brilliant, can I join the community? And Ray said, no, I wasn't allowed. I had to go away and spend some time praying about it first. And I thought, fair enough, that's a good response. I can't just kind of be caught up in the moment of being on Lindisfarne, meeting Ray, who's wrote this book that changed my life, and just kind of jump into the joining the community is a very serious kind of commitment to make. So I went away. That was kind of in the May of that year, 2004. That was so just about 20 years ago. I did try my best to be objective in my prayers, but I kind of already knew this is really what I wanted to do. I was being led there. There was no way that those accidental, steps could have happened without some kind of divine intervention and orchestration.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's amazing, isn't it? How God guides our steps, I think, is often amazing.
Yeah. So I joined that community, and that kind of led me into discovering more about what new monasticism was, which led me into the monastic way of living, which really, again, resonated with me. Through more study, I encountered the desert tradition, Christian mysticism, and all of those things kind of just wove into my being. So that's kind of my story. That's how I led into it, and I found all of it, having that monastic rhythm in my life, really helpful for my own way of life, for my own being. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, and now you run a ministry called Waymark Ministries. Can you tell us a bit about that and how it affects your life now?
Yes. Well, again, Waymark Ministries kind of started a little bit by accident. So I was a church minister, a full-time church minister, back at the end of the 2000 noughts. And I used my own church building to run workshop days on things like Celtic Christianity and Christian meditation and mysticism, the things that I had been inspired by on my own journey, on top of kind of doing the Sunday morning sermons at the time. I wanted to share the things that you probably couldn't really say in those times. So I was running workshop days in that church, and people from other churches were coming along to that, ministers and other people saying, this would go down really well at our church. Will you come and do it at our church? And so I said, yeah, that's fine, no problem. And I kind of just got busier and busier. So in 2010, I decided that there was so much desire for me to go and do this in other places that I wasn't able to be a full-time minister anymore. I needed to do that part-time and do Waymark Ministries part-time. And I picked the name Waymark Ministries purely because the tax department in the UK needs a name for your company if you're going to do self-employment and claim tax, even if it's only a few hours a week. So, obviously our Waymark is that post that guides you on the safe path when the land is treacherous. And I thought, for me, these things that I've discovered, they are waymarks. They are posts that have guided me on a path where the land around is quite treacherous, and life it can be, quite demanding, and it can draw you away from a spiritual path. It can become overwhelming. And these things have kept me on track. So that's why I picked the term Waymark Ministries, because it was really what it was. And that's all I've been doing, really. And then I carried on doing that, literally just sharing the things that have inspired me on my own journey with other people. So sharing with other people the things that have inspired me on my own journey. And over the next 3 or 4 years, I got busier and busier in that. So about 20 years ago, November 2014, I went full-time in Waymark Ministries, and I've been doing that for the last 10 years. And I've just really continued to do the same thing. So all of the things that inspire me, all of the things that allow me to transform and change in my own spiritual journey, I just like to share that with other people. So that's what I'm doing. So it's still quite a root in Celtic Christianity, Christian mysticism, but also in the last few years, a little bit leaning into kind of the Eastern mindset, reading a lot of Bede Griffiths and that sort of thing. Leaning into kind of a bit of Eastern mysticism and the Christocentric version of that. But yeah, so that's what Waymark Ministries is, really just.
Oh, that's great. Yeah. Well, I think what you said about, following the things that you had seen transforming yourself. I mean, I think that's the basis for the most authentic kind of ministry for any of us. I know some people kind of get into ruts where they're just doing stuff in a way for the sake of doing it. But I think when something has transformed us, it definitely has the greatest impact on other people. And I think one thing that you did that certainly impacted me and others was the writing of your book, Celtic Advent, in 2018, 40 Days of Devotions for Christmas. Tell us a little bit about this and how you got interested in Celtic Advent as compared to the Western way of looking at Advent. I mean, as you know, I'm very interested in this and have just written a book on Celtic Advent myself, but it was your book in many ways that led me along that path and eventually resulted in me writing my own book.
Yeah, that's wonderful to hear. That's very encouraging. So the discovery that Celtic Christianity had these 3 sets of 40 days in a year, which was something stated by Gildas, who's a 6th century Welsh historian, a contemporary of David, who became the patron saint of Wales. He called them the 3 40s. So there was 40 days leading up to Lent, 40 days leading up to Easter, which we still have as Lent, 40 days leading up to Christmas, and 40 days following Pentecost. So there was 3 sets of 40 days, and 3s are very important to Celts pre and post Christianity, the Trinity, the Triads. And if you add up 3 40s, you obviously get 120, which is roughly about 1/3 of the year. So 1/3 of the year, there are these 3 different sets of 40 days, which I find a fantastic rhythm.
That's lovely.
I've written a 40-day devotional for each of those 3,
wonderful,
which match together. But yeah, so I love the idea of the 40 days of Celtic Advent, because it means that I get to start my Advent focus and journey each year before the either the commercial Advent starts, which is obviously, when everyone opens their Advent calendar on the 1st of December, or the liturgical Advent starts 4 Sundays before Christmas. There is this beautiful period between the 15th of November and the other 2 beginnings, where it just kind of, it feels like a sacred space to me.
I agree.
that
Yes.
little extra bit, because I am already focusing and the busyness and the rush of it all, and the everybody else doing all the stuff. It hasn't begun yet. So I know in your book you talk about making an Advent wreath for that period. So
Yes.
before we get all our Christmas decorations out and the other Advent calendars and things, I just have one candle in a storm glass that I put up in my front window each year, and have done for many, many years before Celtic Advent came out as a book. And I just light that each night between evening prayer and bedtime. It's just a light. I just have that. Like I say, it feels a bit like a sacred space, that period of time, to have
Yes.
that extra bit. So yeah, a little bit more calm and subdued before the rush starts. And I love beginning my season like that.
Well, it's even more important here in the United States because we've got Thanksgiving thrown into that mix as well.
Yes.
And so to actually be able to focus on Advent before the hype of Thanksgiving and then of liturgical Advent, I find makes an incredible difference in terms of my focus. And I think, as you know, one of the things I say in my book too is that because we don't have any clear idea of how the Celts actually celebrated Advent, we can really do what we like. And it means like you've got your window, I've got my little Celtic garden, and people can kind of focus on it in the way that really resonates with them, which I think is lovely.
Yes. Yeah, that's true. Yeah. You can use that space, that time there, just however is helpful to you. Yeah.
Yes. Well, and in your book, I think your book is a lot more not academic, but I think it shows that you're much more of a scholar than I have been of Celtic Christianity, which I've really appreciated. Tell us a little bit more about the book and how it's been received too.
Yeah, thank you. The book itself has been received really well. I think it's probably the best selling of it comes in a set of 4. So the 340s, and I also wrote one called Celtic Year, which has the 8 points of the year, the 4 seasons, the 2 solstices and the 2 equinoxes as well. And there's liturgies and prayers and a week of devotions for that too. But out of the 4 books, I think probably Celtic Advent is the one that sells the most. Then maybe Celtic Lent after that. I think, the way that I set it up, there's some indication. Like you said, we don't really know a great deal about what the Celtic Christians did, what the monastic centres did at any point in the year, really. We have very little actual primary source information about that. But there's some indication that they looked at what I've called the 3 comings of Christ, which is the coming of Christ in the incarnation, which is what everybody is focused on through Advent, but then also the coming of Christ into our lives, which wasn't just a one-off event where you became born again for the Celtic Christians, but it was a repetitive event where we invited Christ into our life in every aspect and every element of what we were doing. A bit like Brother Lawrence in the practice of the presence of God, inviting the presence of the cosmic Christ into everything. And then the look at the revelation, the coming of Christ at the end of all things, as it were, and how we prepare. So the whole book is about preparation, as Advent is, focused on. And I look a little bit towards the end of the book on some of the other elements of the winter festivals and the winter season that the Celtic peoples and Celtic Christians followed as well. Yes, I am a historian by nature in myself, so my book draws more on some of the primary sources and the kind of history. Yours, I've wandered through yours, and you tell a lot of stories about you and your husband Tom, and there's other kind of expressions in yours I think are very beautiful and wonderful, and I try and use some of the history that we know, but yes, we have no idea what the Celtic Christians did over Advent. And so I think, just learning about some of the aspects and elements of Celtic Christianity, we get some kind of idea of what it might have been like in those kind of monastic centres. And because all of Celtic Christianity was monastic based, whereas the Latin church was much more focused on local church, all of Celtic Christianity was monastic based. So it was running in monasteries. The churches were inside the monastic centre. The people who were part of the communities were taking vows and were monastic in that living array. So there was some aspects of their faith and their expressions that we do know, including things like the connection with nature, and seeing and believing that God is in all of nature. This kind of pantheism where God is in everything, and there's this saturation of the divine. So through that understanding of the creation being part of it, we can really draw into that through the winter season, as with other seasons as well. But in the winter, particularly, we have that real sense of the barrenness of the natural world, in the northern hemisphere, of course.
Yes.
And in the Advent season, there is a barrenness in the natural world, and the way that we understand it, and the way that we can live that out, can be interpreted in multiple ways. So there's a wonderful illustration from what we do know from Celtic history, that we are able to then live out here. So really, the desert tradition was a very strong, heavy influence on Celtic Christianity, more so than the Latin Church. But the desert tradition, which is the foundation of Eastern Orthodox Christianity, was very heavily influenced of the Celtic Church and Celtic Christianity. Because obviously there wasn't one particular Celtic church in that way. There were individual monastic centres with a familiar thread through them. But there aren't many deserts in Britain and Ireland. You may have noticed when you're visiting.
Yes.
There are not many barren places like that, but lots of forests, lots of fields, lots of mountains. But actually in the Celtic lands, particularly Wales and Scotland and Ireland, there's quite a lot of places with the word desert that's still part of their place name.
Interesting.
Which is likely to be a place that was a monastic centre at some point for the Celts.
Oh, interesting.
So really what they did was they looked at this inspiration, and they brought it into their own context. They then appropriated how they could live that out in their own context. In the fact that they don't have deserts, they don't have mountains to go and hide into, spend time in the sun and the sand and the barrenness. But they did have mountains that were full of green and lush forest and those sorts of things. So they appropriated it to their own context. And one of the other things we know is that when monasteries planted monasteries elsewhere, the monastic rule from the founding monastery was then placed in the monastery that was being founded. Then they adapted that to the people that were around them.
Interesting.
So, for example, Aidan would have brought the rule of Iona over to Northumbria, but then adapted it because the Angles of Northumbria were a very different type of people to the Scots of Dalriada. So they then appropriated that into the culture and the context. So, one of the things that we can do as people inspired by ancient and historic Celtic Christianity is take that heritage, that rich, beautiful expression of Christianity, and draw it into ourselves, but then appropriate that expression into our own context, our own modern context. And I think
that's part of what appeals to a lot of people today, is that we can bring it into our context and adapt it, and that therefore it's not imposing a set of rules upon us that have got to be done the same way that everybody else has done them.
Exactly.
But there is that ability to listen to God and to hear how we can live it out in our own context, which I think is very attractive.
Yes, yeah, very attractive. I think that's a like you say, it's a big draw to a lot of people. That
Mhm.
there isn't the set down dogma and doctrine that we find in a lot of other elements of the Christian faith and Christian history, simply
Yes,
because we don't know a lot about it. We know
yes.
fragments, and we can piece together bits, and we can
Mhm.
see some kind of familiar thread from the Irish monastic centres and the British monastic centres, and the Scottish monastic centres, as you know, as we'd now see it as Scotland. Um, and so so we can see some elements of what they were doing and how they thought and how they understood and interpreted scriptures in certain ways. But yeah, we can then express that in ways that resonate with us and our modern context as well. Yeah.
Mhm. Well, and of course, the other interesting thing is that they had women in leadership as well as men way back then, which
Yeah.
was so distinctive, of course, from the Roman Church. And I think, is something that definitely speaks to a lot of us today. Not just women either, but I think a lot of people are attracted by that aspect of Celtic spirituality too.
Yes, so we got the famous people like Hilda of Whitby running double monasteries, Ita of Coldingham running a double monastery. When double monastery meaning there were male and female
Mhm.
monastic people under vows there, and Hilda was leading that one, Ita was leading that one, and then others have the wonderful story of Bridget accidentally being consecrated as bishop,
Yes,
which might be a little bit colloquial. It might be real. Who knows? Who cares? The purpose of it was to go, this is a thing. This is
yes,
where their mindset was. And that kind of came a little bit from their background. They grew out of their culture, and their culture was
yes,
the Celtic tribes.
yes,
And there was a sense of the women having an empowerment in those tribes, most
yes,
famously Boudica, of course, in Britain,
mhm,
being a very
yes,
powerful, leader of the Celtic tribes.
yes.
So there was that sense of they did have females leading some of their monastic centres. Yeah.
Mhm. Yeah. What other advice would you like to give people who are celebrating Celtic Advent?
Um, I think one of the biggest things I think for me is really important to remember is to not get caught up in the busyness and commercialism of the
Mhm.
season. And they're two separate things, of course, the busyness and the commercialism of the season, because you can be very busy doing sacred things
Yes,
like organizing church services and carol services and nativity services and all of those other things,
yes,
that you can be caught up in the very busy context that actually taking it as a sacred space in time, I think is really important. And as I said, that extra run up that you have, that quiet period before, it's try and get that mindset in to set your intention for Advent in that way, helps a lot before it hits the normal Advent or the more traditional Advent. So I think that's
yes,
one of the main things I think is really important, is to make sure, even if you are inevitably going to get caught up in it. Because if you're running a church in whatever fashion, if you're someone in church who organizes the things, you are going to have to get busy over that period. It is going to get busy. But to always find or create a space in your own day where it can be a sacred moment.
mhm,
You can
yes,
focus in on that sacredness of the season. And also remembering that Advent is not Christmas season. The Christmas
yes,
season starts on Christmas Day and carries on afterwards. Whereas
yes.
the world obviously thinks that Christmas season is the lead up to Christmas, and once Boxing Day happens, it's over.
It's
Um,
over, yes. Well, I think
absolutely.
that's nice because those of us that really believe in Christmas as a 12-day celebration, we have it all to ourselves. It's
Yeah.
kind of like we can really enter into Christmas. My husband and I always go away on a personal retreat um, just after Christmas. In fact, we're just booking it this week.
Mm.
And it's wonderful because you have had all that hype going up. I mean, even with all our best intentions of using devotionals like yours and like mine, taking time during the day and taking time during the week, there's still so much busyness that invades. And so we found that taking a couple of days straight after Christmas where we refresh, we renew, and we refocus is something that helps us tremendously as well.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's intentionality, I think, both before and after Christmas that becomes important for us. And I think that devotionals can definitely help us find that kind of an intentionality as we journey through the season. So it's something that I would certainly recommend that people kind of look at the Celtic Advent concept and those weeks before the liturgical Advent kind of comes, and consider an extended time of Advent. I love that thing of the three periods of 40 days. I think to have that kind of rhythm to our year sounds just wonderful to me.
Yeah, and of course each of them had their own focus as well. So
Yes.
it's very distinct. The lead up to Easter obviously is the same focus as we have now, and the following on from Pentecost was focusing on the lives of inspirational people in the faith, which of course for the Celtic Christians was probably mostly the desert fathers and mothers.
Yes.
But for us can include the Celtic saints. So yeah, I've
But
picked
we've
40
got so
different
many
Celtic
people
saints.
to draw on now.
Oh, absolutely. So many over the last couple of thousand years. Yes.
Yes. Yeah, which is wonderful. Well, David, thank you so much. This has been very interesting, very inspirational for me, and made me realize that I need to look more into not just Celtic Advent and Celtic Lent, but that period after Pentecost as well, and seeing these as things that set the rhythm of our lives. So thank you very much for this
Pleasure,
time.
Christine. Thank you.
Okay. In this episode of Liturgical Rebels, I have been in conversation with David Cassian Cole. He shared his journey into Celtic spirituality, detailing his early experiences and the accidental yet transformative encounters that shaped his spiritual path. We discussed the founding of Waymark Ministries, which focuses on sharing insights from Celtic spirituality and mysticism. The conversation also delved into the significance of Celtic Advent, its unique structure of 3 sets of 40 days, and the reception of Cassian's book on the subject. Additionally, the role of women in Celtic leadership was highlighted, along with practical advice for celebrating Celtic Advent amidst the busyness of the season. In the next episode, the final one for 2024, Forrest Inslee, host of Earthkeepers podcast, who interviewed me in the first episode of Liturgical Rebels, will once again be with me. We will discuss the highlights of this year's episodes, the challenges and joys of hosting a podcast, the impact it has had on my life, and my hopes and dreams for next year's season. I am Christine Syne, author of Celtic Advent, Following an Unfamiliar Path, a new devotional book that guides us through the 40 days of Celtic Advent, beginning on November 15th. I hope you will join us in this important season of celebration. My other books include The Gift of Wonder and Digging Deeper, The Art of Contemplative Garden. All my books are available on Amazon. I also facilitate the God's Space Light website and write regularly on Substack. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to the podcast. Please also share it with your friends or join me on Substack, Instagram, or Facebook.